Sorry about that. Somehow lost my internet connection. That was weird. I'm not sure what happened there. S- Sorry about that. Okay. Well, hopefully people will pick back up. Hopefully people will pick up on this again. They probably have one head left, but I'll go ahead and finish this out. So this is St. Louis, France, continued. So for those who want to watch the other one, I got up to about 16 minutes worth of about watching one. We talked about um, Saint Genesius, the comedian first, and then now I'm on to Saint Louis the Ninth, or Saint Louis of France. So, anyways, so I was just got done talking about how his father died, so he took over. He was 12 years old when his father died, and his mother was regent, so kind of took over, reigned as queen in a sense as the ruler of France for the time being until he was old enough, and she protected the kingdom until he got old enough. Then he took over, and then uh, and then it says that um, he was very much a great lover of the church, and and had a very great reverence for the church's ministers, but he did not take sides. Though he when bishops stepped out of hand, he wasn't afraid to, or when bishops accused other bishops, some of that, he would always hear both sides of the stories. He wouldn't just take one side right away or play favorites or anything like that. So it said Louis enjoyed the conversation of priests or other religious men, and he often invited such, like Saint. He actually invited Saint Thomas Aquinas to his house. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. Um, but he knew how to observe seasons with a decent liberty. Once, when a friar had started a grave religious topic at table, he turned the discourse to another subject, saying, "All things have their time." He celebrated feasts and rejoicings on the creation of nights and other such occasions with magnificence, but banished from his court all diversions dangerous to morals. So basically, he wasn't afraid to celebrate the installation of a knight to the court, or celebrated feast days and special things that deserved recognition and deserved a nice party type of thing. But when it came to a danger to being immoral, he banished it from his court. So, and he would tolerate neither vulgar obscenity nor thoughtless profanity. I was a good 22 years in the Holy King's company, says Joinville, and never once did I hear him swear, either by God or his mother or his saints. I did not even hear him name the devil except if he met the word when reading aloud or when discussing what had been read. And a Dominican friar testified that he had never heard him speak ill natured of anyone. When he was urged to put to death the son of Hugh de la Marche, who had followed his father in rebellion, Louis refused, saying, "A son cannot refuse to obey his father." Um, wait a minute, let me see. Oh, okay, I see. Um, so basically, he refused to put this particular guy to death because he was just being obedient to his father. So he would not. put him to death for being a rebellion. When he was 19, St. Louis married Margaret, the eldest daughter of Raymond Berenger, Count of Provence, whose second daughter Eleanor was married to King Henry III, who was King of England. Okay, so basically it says St. Louis married Margaret, the eldest daughter um, of this guy named Raymond, uh, whose sister, and his second daughter Eleanor was married. So basically, so St. Louis's wife Margaret, her younger sister Eleanor was the queen to King Henry the Third. So basically, St. Louis's brother-in-law was King Henry the Third of England. Huh, that's interesting. So, all right. So it says his third. Um, oh, okay. Raymond's third daughter, Sanchia, wa, went to his brother Richard of Cornwall. Okay, um, who was also in England, and Beatrice, the youngest, to Charles' brother to St. Louis. Okay, so all right, so basically, it sounds like this guy Raymond, Count of Provence, had one, two, three, four daughters. So the oldest went married St. Louis. The second oldest married King Henry III. The third oldest married Richard of Cornwall, and the fourth, the youngest, married Charles, who was the brother of St. Louis. So that's interesting. The marriage was blessed with a happy union of hearts and 11 children. So St. Louis and Margaret had 11 children, 5 sons and 6 daughters, from whose descendants kings were given to France until that January 21st, 1793, when the Abbe Edgeworth, it is often stated, said to Louis XVI, as the guillotine was about to fall, "Son of St. Louis, go up to heaven." So that's interesting. So the reign of basically the lineage of King St. Louis the Ninth. His lineage went from, so he was born. Remember, he was born in 1214, became king in the year. Well, he was officially king in the year 1226, but didn't officially take over the kingdom until he was around 18, 19 years old. Um, but so all the way from 1226 to the year 1793, when King Louis the 16th um, was killed by the guillotine during the French Revolution. So that's a long lineage to go. About 17. So over 500 years his lineage went. So that's pretty amazing. Um, in the year 1235, having come of age, St. Louis took the government of his kingdom into his own hands. But he continued to show the greatest deference to his mother, and to profit by her counsel, although his mother was inclined to be jealous of any unkind to her daughter-in-law. Okay, all right, so it says that his mother was inclined to be jealous and was unkind to her daughter. So basically, it sounds like King Louis the Ninth's wife, Margaret, did not get along well with his mother. So that happens quite a bit, I guess. The first of many religious foundations for which Louis was responsible was the Abbey of Reaumont. In the year 1239, Baldwin II, the Latin emperor at Constantinople, made St. Louis, in gratitude for his um, largesse to the Christians in Palestine and other parts of the East, um, a present. So he said, so King Baldwin II, who was the emperor of Constantinople. Okay, yeah. So basically, this would have been after the First Crusade. There was a king, basically, kind of in Constantinople, a Latin king, um, who um, gave a present to King Louis IX, a present of the crown of thorns, which was then in the hands of the Venetians as a pledge for a loan of money to Baldwin, which Louis had to discharge. That's interesting. He sent 2 Dominican friars to bring this treasure to France, and met it himself beyond the Seine. Attended by his whole court, to the house he to house it he pulled down his chapel of Saint Nicholas and built the Sainte Chapelle, which is now empty of its relic. Um, that relic, of course, the crown of thorns, went to Notre Dame in Paris, which of course recently burned. But they were able to save that relic of the crown of thorns. So that's interesting. So basically, that crown of thorns that was housed in Notre Dame in Paris came from King Louis IX, who received it from King Baldwin II, or the Emperor King Baldwin II. Um, and in the year 1239. So that's interesting. I had no idea about that. That's pretty cool. So for those who are just joining me, I just see that some people are joining back in. Sorry about, so some reason my internet connection just stopped for whatever reason. I don't know why, and so I lost the connection. So I restarted it, and I'm glad you're back. So, anyways, um, so he received the crown of thorns as a gift, which is beautiful. All right. He brought the Carthusians to Paris and endowed them with the palace of. I'm sorry, I'm not a guy who pronounces French very well, so I'm not even going to really pronounce some of these names. So he brought Carthusians to Paris and helped his mother in the foundation of the convent, another convent. Okay. Several ordinances of this prince show us how much he applied himself to see justice well administered. In succeeding reigns, however, whenever complaints were raised among the people, the cry of those dissatisfied was to demand that abuses should be reformed and justice impartially administered, as was done in the reign of St. Louis. Okay, so basically, um, King Louis the Ninth was so good in governing his people and seeking to be just in all affairs that later kings and princes who succeeded him, or later on in France, later years, would basically say, "Hey, you need to be more like King Louis the Ninth," basically. Um, so he had a reputation of being such a fair and just king. In the year 1230, he forbade all manner of usury and restrained the Jews in particular from practicing it. Okay, so basically, so maybe that's where that comes from, where he might have persecuted the Jews. Um, in that they were using the usury, they were taking advantage of people, and he forbade the Jews from doing that practice. In his, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to double check to look up what is usury again. Um, Maybe someone can quickly tell me. I'm sorry, my vocabulary. The illegal, yeah, that's what I thought. The illegal action or practice of lending money at unreasonably high rates of interest. Yeah, okay, that's what I thought it was. So basically, yeah. So I'm gonna be honest. Definitely the different Jewish people, and like New York City, and also in Israel, they're very much into finances and things like that. And so it's interesting that they were doing that in France. So basically, they were taking advantage high interest rates for people who wanted to take a loan out for them. They would take advantage of people and try to get extra interest, get extra money. So and so he banished that in this country, that practice. So um, which is interesting. Um, he published a law commanding all who should be guilty of blasphemy to be branded, and thus punished a rich and important citizen of Paris. To some who murmured at this severity, he said that he would undergo that punishment himself, if thus he might put a stop to the crime. Basically, it's very much against blasphemy or anything like that. So he was very strict when it came to the faith and things like that, as well as anybody who preached out very much against Christianity. He was very strict on that. So, okay. All right. Well, anyways, it says he protected vassals from oppressive lords, and when a Flemish count had hanged 3 children for hunting rabbits in his woods, had him imprisoned and tried, not by his peers as he demanded, but by the ordinary judges who condemned him to death. So that's interesting. He afterwards spared his life, but subjected him to a fine which deprived him of the greater part of his estate. So basically, so it's interesting. So um, this Flemish count had hanged 3 children for just strictly for hunting rabbits in his woods. Okay, and so King Louis had him imprisoned and tried by not by his peers but by ordinary judges. Okay, who actually condemned him to death. But then King Louis had mercy on him, even though he didn't really deserve it, but had mercy on him and actually gave him a huge fine, which deprived him from a lot of his basically all of his woods and stuff, his estate. actually deprived him a lot of that. So this money the king ordered to be expended on the religious and charitable works. He forbade feudal lords to make private war upon one another, and his scrupulous fidelity in keeping his word and observing treaties was notable. This impartial and inflexible integrity made barons, prelates, and even foreign kings ask to have him for judge and arbitrator and put their affairs into his hands. So he was such a just man, always wanted to do what was righteous, that and it was so well known that even kings from other countries would ask him to be their arbitrator or the judge when it came to matters. So that's pretty awesome. Again, I know more people are joining, so again, I'm sorry about the earlier disruption there. For some reason, I lost my internet, so my live stream stopped, so I had to start a new one. So hopefully you're able to, I don't know what the heck that is. Hopefully you're able to join me now. So it says of Hugh of um, Lusignan, Count of La Marche, made trouble soon after the king's majority. His estates were a fief, and he refused to pay homage to the Count of Poitiers, the brother of Saint Louis. Okay, Hugh's wife. So this guy's name was Hugh, who was a count, made trouble soon after the king's majority. His estates were a fiefdom of a particular individual, and he refused to pay homage to the count, who was the brother of Saint Louis. His wife, Hugh's wife, this guy, Isabel, was the widow of King John and mother of Henry the Third of England, who came over to support his stepfather. It says Saint Louis defeated King Henry the Third, who was never born to be a soldier. Okay, um, so it sounds like here that Henry the Third. This is interesting. So his brother-in-law. So it sounds like his brother-in-law. So it sounds like his brother-in-law actually kind of had a dispute or something like that. So because it says St. Louis defeated King Henry the Third, and it says it must have been something. Must have had some type of battle or something happened between them. So Henry fled to Bordeaux, and the next year returned to England, having made a truce with the French. So it sounds like they kind of went to war with each other because of a dispute. Doesn't really say exactly why exactly. It says refused to pay homage. So there must have been some type of dispute going on. Oh, I see now. So it's basically this Hugh guy. Um, his wife Isabel was the widow of King John, and um, who was also the mother of King Henry the Third. And so King Henry must have sided with this dude, even though this dude was supposed to pay homage to King Louis the Ninth's brother. Um, this guy didn't want to pay homage, and so King Henry the Third sided with this guy, and so they kind of went to war over this, which is interesting. And it says King Louis defeated King Henry. So and it says that King Henry made a truce with the French, with King Louis the Ninth. And it says 17 years later, Louis concluded another treaty with King Henry the Third. By it, he yielded to England the okay, so it looks like there was territory and things like that was under dispute. And so it says when they re-signed a treaty 17 years later that he gave up certain territories, gave back to England, and then King Henry renounced territories and gave back Normandy and several other places back to the French. Okay. The French criticized their sovereign's concessions, so basically some of the French people criticized King Henry or King Louis from renouncing so much, giving back to England. But it says, but Louis replied that he hoped by them to cement a lasting peace between the two nations, and that it was very honorable to his crown to have so great a king as a vassal. But some historians are of the opinion that had Louis pushed home his advantage, the Hundred Years' War would have been averted for his successor. So basically, it sounds like so basically, King Louis basically said, "Look, it had to develop basically England and France were at war, and he didn't want them to be at war. they're at peace right now, but they wanted that peace to be lasting, so he gave up extra stuff to England, um, and to make sure there was peace. But then it says historians later on said that if Lewis had not given up so much, then maybe the Hundred Years' War may never have happened. We don't know that, um, but that's what some historians are saying. So who knows? Yes, people do make mistakes, and maybe it was a mistake. We don't know. But again, Lewis did it all for peace, and okay. After an illness in the year 1244, Lewis determined to undertake a crusade in the east. And early the next year, he, by letter, assured the Christians in Palestine that he would make all possible haste to their assistance against the infidels. Infidels being the Muslims. Okay, got to remember here, a little context, all right? So earlier, this will be the Second Crusade, I believe. Earlier, um, you have the Christians occupying the Holy Land, okay? Palestine, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, all the holy sites. Remember, the Christians have been there. Remember, it was all under the occupation of Rome, remember? And then, of course, Rome, of course, Christianized. And so Christianity was full blown all over those places, okay? And yes, the Jews lived there too. Some of them still live there in the area. But it was Christian now, okay? And so Christians had occupied the land now. They had churches everywhere, okay? And then the Muslims came um, in the 1100s and began to take over, invaded basically to take over, start conquering, putting people to the sword. All these Christian pilgrims were coming to the Holy Land to visit the holy sites, the birthplace of Christ, the place where Calvary was, the resurrection, the tomb, all that kind of stuff. They were doing pilgrimages, and then these Muslims came in and started slaughtering them all and taking over the land. So basically, trying to take over all the Middle East, and so Europe was like Christian Europe's like we need to. They're killing our people. We need to protect them and to take back what was already ours, what was theirs, So protecting their land. And so they went in to do that. And so that happened. So the first crusade went in and was successful. They retook Jerusalem and stuff. And yes, when there's war, atrocities do happen. Um, Again, it was the Muslims who were the invaders, and the Christians were protecting their place and took it back. Um, and then, yes, atrocities happen. So on both sides. But it's amazing how today historians and even secular people and even yes even Christian people say that the Crusaders were the bad ones. They were the ones who did all the atrocities. Not at all. Yes, there were some bad things that happened. It happens in war. um, but it was the Christians who were protecting their land. They were defending their land and defending their people. So anyway, so a second crusade was called up. Again, this was Saint Bernard actually preached this one. And so King Louis the Ninth answered the call. All right, who a few months before had retaken Jerusalem. So again, that first crusade retook Jerusalem. Okay, but the opposition of his conciliators and nobles, the preparation of the expedition and the settling of his kingdom put off his departure for 3.5 years. So it took him 3.5 years before he can even depart. Even though he took the call to go on this crusade, it took him 3.5 years before he can actually go, because it took so much time to gather forces, get everything ready for his kingdom to be with Ali King and things like that. So at the 13th General Council at Lyon in the year 1245, all benefices were taxed a 20th of their income for 3 years for the relief of the Holy Land. The English representatives strongly protested against this, and this gave encouragement to the Crusaders. Okay, so basically, so the English representatives in France didn't really want to do this, nor did they even want to do that in England as well. But anyways, but by this income going toward the relief of the Holy Land was very much this gave encouragement to the Crusaders. In the year 1248, Lewis sailed for Cyprus, where he was joined by William Longsword, Earl of Salisbury, and 200 English knights. And remember, under each knight, they had their own. Each knight was usually a nobleman, and they had their own soldiers who fought under them. So you had 200 knights, right, and all of their own soldiers who served them. So well, I don't remember many thousands that could be altogether. Okay. Their objective was Egypt, all right, because you had Alexandria, you had different Christian, cities that were taken over by the Muslims. Okay, so they want to take them back. Um, Damietta in the delta of the Nile was easily taken, and St. Louis made a solemn entry into the city, not with the pomp and circumstance of a conqueror, but with the humility of a truly Christian prince, walking barefoot with the queen. So his queen was with him. The princes, his brothers, and other great lords, preceded by the papal legate. The king ordered that all plundering and other crimes should be strictly inquired into and punished. So basically, yes, that happens. Like you said, atrocities do happen during war, and you had soldiers that would go plunder and rape and do different crazy things that people would do back in those days. And when King Louis IX came in, he's like, no, that stops. And those who were actually committing those crimes need to be punished. So, okay. So the king ordered all plundering and other crimes should be strictly inquired into and punished, and that restitution should be made. And he forbade any infidel, he forbade any Muslim to be slain whom it was possible to make a prisoner. So basically, all those who were captured, they were to be taken prisoner. And if they would refuse to be prisoner, if they refused to be captured, refused to be taken prisoner, so basically those who basically would be willing to die, anybody was possible to make a prisoner. Okay, if possible, give them that chance to surrender. Okay, if they won't surrender, if they want to fight to death, well, fight to the death. Okay. But notwithstanding all of his watchfulness, many, to his grief, gave themselves up to debauchery and outrageous acts of violence. So basically, so people still got away with it. In other words, there are some people who still continued to plunder and they weren't brought to justice. But he did everything he could to bring them to justice. Owing to the rise of the Nile and the summer heat, the Crusaders could not follow up their advantage, and it was not till 6 months had passed that they finally advanced to attack the Saracens. The Saracens would be the Muslims who were in Jerusalem at the time, who were on the other side of the river. So okay, so Saracens is another name for a group of Muslims, a group of those who followed Islam. Then followed another 6 months of desultory fighting, desultory fighting, in which the Crusaders lost many by battle and sickness, until in April 1250 St. Louis himself was taken prisoner and his army routed with frightful slaughter. So basically, it sounds like they lost, and he was captured. During his captivity, the king recited the divine office every day with two chaplains, just as if he had been in perfect health in his own palace. And to the insults that were sometimes offered him, he opposed an air of majesty and authority which kept his guards in awe. So basically, after he was captured, he still continued to pray. He prayed the divine office, the liturgy of the hours, which I pray every day. And that when he was insulted by the Saracens, by the Muslims, he didn't let it get to him. He just basically responded back with kindness, as with majesty and with authority, which his guards very much saw in awe of him. So when he was asked and refused to give up the castles in Syria, he was threatened with the most ignominious treatment and with torture, to which he coolly replied that they were masters of his body and might do with him what they pleased. The Sultan sent to him a proposal by which he demanded 1,000,000 bezants of gold. I'm not sure what a bezant is. And the city in the city of Egypt of Damietta, uh, Damietta, for his ransom and that of the other prisoners. Louis answered that a king of France ought not to redeem himself for money, but that he would give the city for his own release and the 1,000,000 bezants for that of all the other prisoners. The Sultan at that time was overthrown by the Mamluk emirs, and thus eventually released the king. So it sounds like this Sultan was overthrown by another group of Muslims, and this group eventually released the king and the other prisoners on these terms. But the sick and wounded crusaders in Timothea they treacherously slew. So basically, so the king said he would release, or the king did actually. So basically, he just worked out a deal with with these guys and with the Muslims, and they were all released. But those who were too sick to move, um, the Muslims actually slaughtered. They treacherously slaughtered them. So you don't hear about that stuff in history. So unfortunately. St. Louis then sailed to Palestine with the remainder of his army. There he remained until 1254, visiting all the holy places he could, encouraging the Christians. So basically, remember, Jerusalem was still occupied by the Christians. So he was able to. So they were basically trying to take back Christian territory down in Syria, down in Egypt, and all that stuff. And they were successful in Egypt, but they were working their way up towards Syria. And or he was captured and stuff like that. And so, but he was still able to visit parts of the Holy Land that were still occupied by the Christians. Okay, visiting all the holy places he could, encouraging the Christians and strengthening the defenses of the Latin kingdom, which was there, such as it was. Then news being brought to him of the death of his mother, who was regent in his absence, he returned to France. He had many he had been away almost 6 years, but he was oppressed by the memory of the distresses of the Christians in the East, and he continued to wear the cross on his clothes to show that he intended to return to their assistance. So basically, when he returned back to France, he was very distressed because a lot of the Christians were still being persecuted or still being oppressed by the Muslims who were still trying to take over their territory. So basically, um, they were still attacking the Christians there, and he wanted to go back because he knew they were suffering still. Um, so he wore a cross on his clothes to remind himself that he wanted to return. Their position, the Christians, it says the Christians' position got rapidly worse between 1263 and 1268. These Muslims, the Mamluk Muslims, took Nazareth, Caesarea, Jaffa, and Antioch. So the Muslims basically conquered those territories that were Christian at the time. About the year 1257, Master Robert de Sorbonne, a canon and a very learned doctor of Paris, laid the foundations of that theological institute in the city, which became known after him as the Sorbonne. Master Robert was a personal friend of St. Louis and sometimes acted as his confessor, and the king enthusiastically seconded his project and helped to endow it. Louis also founded in Paris for poor blind men a hospital, I'm not going to pronounce it, so called because there were in it at the first foundation 300 such patients. He likewise made provision of all kinds for the poor. In addition to 13 special indigent guests, he had daily a large number of poor folks to meals near his own palace. And in Lent and in Advent, all who presented themselves in these he often served in person. Sounds like so. Basically, during Lent and Advent, he would serve the poor. He had people who would come. He had indignant guests that would come to. He would serve personally in his palace. During Lent and Advent, he would present himself. He would actually often serve in person. He would serve the poor, things like that, in his kingdom. He kept lists of needy people, whom he regularly relieved in every province of his dominions. Though not personally a legislator, he had a passion for justice, and he transformed the feudal king's court into a highly organized royal court of justice. And as in the case of Henry III and his barons, sovereign princes submitted their difficulties to his rulings. And in all causes he endeavored to substitute proof by witnesses and decision by judicial process of arbitration for appeal to arms. Having one day stood godfather to a Jew who was baptized at Saint Denis, which was a monastery there in Paris, Saint Louis said to the ambassador of the Emir of Tunis that to see his master receive that sacrament he would with joy pass the rest of his life in chains under the Saracens. Having one day stood. Okay. Accordingly, people were not surprised when in 1267 he announced another crusade, nor were they pleased. Among less worthy reasons, they feared to lose so good a king, who, if only 52 years old, was weak and with toil, ill health, and austerity. So basically, he decided to go on another crusade, and he was 52 years old at the time, and his people weren't too happy to lose him again since he was such a good king. Joinville said bluntly that those who recommended this voyage to the king sinned grievously, and excused himself, urging the necessity of his staying at home to protect his vassals from oppression. Huh. Okay. I don't quite understand that statement. It says that those who recommended this voyage to the king sinned grievously, and excused himself, urging the necessity of his thing. Okay, so this basically Joinville, this friend, said that those who were recommending him to go on another crusade were sinning grievously against him. So he decided to stay behind to protect his lands and things like that. Okay, from oppression. The king embarked with his army on July 1st in the year 1270. When the fleet was over against was in over against in Sardinia, it was resolved to proceed to Tunis, where soon after landing, the king himself and his eldest son Philip both became sick with typhus. So it sounds like they landed in Tunis and Tunis, um, and they both got sick. So him and his son both got sick with typhus. It was soon seen that Louis was dying. He gave his last instructions to his sons. Remember, he had 11 children, 5 sons and 6 daughters, I think. Um, and so he gave his last instructions to his sons and to his daughter, the queen of Navarre, and composing himself for death. And composed himself for death. On August 24th, which was Sunday, he received the last rites and called for the Greek ambassadors, whom he strongly urged to reunion with the Roman Church. Um, yeah, because you got to remember that the Greek Church or the Eastern Church split from the Catholic Church in the year 1054. All right, and so this is the year 1270. So you got the Eastern Church and the Catholic Church were split, right, at this time. And so he urged the Greek Church, the Eastern Church, to reunite with Rome. Um, he lost his speech the next day from 9 till 12 o'clock. Then recovering it and lifting up his eyes toward heaven, he repeated aloud the words of the psalmist, Lord, I will enter into thy house. I will worship in thy holy temple and will give glory to thy name. He spoke again at 3 in the afternoon, Into thy hands I commend my spirit or my soul, and immediately after breathed his last. His bones and heart were taken back to France and enshrined in the Abbey Church of St. Denis, where they were scattered at the Revolution. He was canonized in the year 1297. So basically, after he died, it sounds like they buried him or they put him in a special place at a tomb, and they hung on to his heart and his bones, and they sent them back to France, where they were enshrined in the Abbey of Saint Denis, which is right there in Paris, right there across the river from Notre Dame. And during the French Revolution, they took his remains, his bones, and his heart, and the revolutionists scattered them. They probably threw them in the river or scattered them about, so desecrated them. So I guess we don't really have those remains left anymore. And he was canonized in the year 1297. So, anyways, well, there you go. That's King Louis the Ninth, or King Saint Louis, King of France. So again, shows that he was a very just man, a very righteous man, very holy man, very humble man, um, and he treated even his enemies with great respect, and he punished. So those who said he was racist or whatever, no, he was just. People who were committing crimes, he punished. So it wasn't anything against who they were; it was just what they were doing. So anyways, a very great king, saint. The Catholic Church, he became a saint for a reason, because he was a holy man for his sanctity and for his virtue and things like that. So, um, and uh, and so anyways, and again, remember, and this they were already starting to have the canonization process. So miracles happen on his behalf. So which means God blesses his sanctity, blesses his life, or those who ask his intercession. So miracles took place, on his behalf. Um, so anyways, so someone that our government officials should look up to, as far as being just, being virtuous, and things like that, and leading their countries and leading their call to govern to holiness, called to be just and moral, and things like that. So, anyways, um, so there you have it. There's King Saint Louis the Ninth, a great and holy king, and it's beautiful. If you ever have a chance to read some of his, he left some letters to his sons, to his children, at when he was about to die, and they're so beautiful. As a matter of fact, if you ever get the Liturgy of the Hours, you were to read from the Office of Readings. They have a quote from him from one of his letters to one of his sons, and it's so beautiful. His encouragement and his advice to one of his sons of how to be a proper king who would take his place. So I guess it would have been King Louis X, maybe. Um, that it was so beautiful to read, um, his words to his son, how to be a virtuous man. And even in that letter, he says, "It is better to die than to ever commit a mortal sin." So really beautiful to see that. So, anyways, Hope you enjoyed that. Again, I'm sorry for the interruption that happened earlier. So you have to put both two videos together. Hopefully, Miss Susan, I'll ask her to make sure she has both videos up, so you can access both. So, but anyways, but they are will both be available on my YouTube channel. So, anyways, hope you have a blessed evening. I haven't eaten dinner yet, so I'm getting ready to eat some dinner. I'm starving, and I hope you have a wonderful and blessed night. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. St. Louis IX, pray for us.